Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this panel discussion, Global Peace and Security, Voices from Israel and Palestine. I'm Diana, and we are joined by not two, not three, but four experts from the region. We will be discussing the recently signed Abraham Accords, the implications of the US elections and Mr. Biden's victory on Israel and Palestine, the importance of women in peacemaking, and a lot more. So stay tuned. A few housekeeping rules to begin with. The event is to last for about an hour. We will take questions at the end of this panel discussion. Please put your questions on the Q&A box and please be respectful in your questions and comments. A quick disclaimer, all opinions and answers that are part of this conversation are personal opinions and not attributable to any institutions. This panel discussion is presented by Harvard W3D, Women in Defense, Diplomacy and Development. It's an innovative network dedicated to connecting and cultivating global leaders who work together towards sustainable peace. Our strategic partners for the event are Harvard Law School Women's Alliance India and Daksha Fellowship. So without much ado, I would like to introduce you to the speakers for tonight. My first guest for today is Brigadier General Israela Oron, now retired. She has had a lengthy and distinguished military career. She served in various key positions, breaking through great gender barriers. She was active in effecting women's integration into the military and in ensuring the recognition of their enormous potential in contributing to the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. We also have Dr. Yuval Benziman, who is a senior faculty in the Conflict Research Management and Resolution Program of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's widely published in the fields of track to negotiations, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and cultural aspects of conflicts. He drafted the annexes of the Geneva Initiative agreement and is currently a member of its steering committee. Thank you for joining us. Our next guest is Mrs. Fatina Jaouni Hodali, who is an advisor at the Negotiation Affairs Department of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. She works on territorial issues, the permanent status issues of borders, and the settlement enterprise. Mrs. Fatina was engaged in the production of the first regional plan for the West Bank and Gaza in 1998 while working at the Palestinian Ministry of Planning. And lastly, we have the dynamic Mr. Nidal Foqaha, who is the Director General of the Palestinian Peace Coalition, a non-profit organization that works on promoting peaceful settlement for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the two-state solution through peaceful and non-violent means. But he'll be joining us in a few minutes. He's stuck in another webinar. Folks, it pains me to say that Mr. Gadi Baldiansky, the co-founder of Geneva Initiative and the spokesperson for the former Prime Minister of Israel, will not be joining us today due to medical issues. Dr. Yuval is joining us instead, and thank you very much for that. Gadi, I really wish you a very speedy recovery. And as for me, I'm Diana Phillips, Senior Advisor, Government Relations for Dell Technologies, and co-founder of Harvard Law School Women's Alliance India. Now that we have all the introductions done, out of the way, let's dive straight into the questions, shall we? My first question is in the geopolitical sphere. Perhaps it's best we start with something that's widely talked about and debated, which is the two-state solution. And a little bit of context for the audience. Of course, it's a solution propounded to establish an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, thereby bringing in lasting peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, some say that this solution is on the verge of collapse. Others oppose the same with one-state solution, and there are others who speak of continuing the status quo. Now that we have distinguished speakers with such diverse background, I was wondering, what is your opinion about the same? Israela, shall we start with you first? You're on mute, Israela.
As a member of the Geneva Accord from the beginning, I am still committed, despite of all the difficulties, to this two-state solution. And believe me, since we signed both sides this agreement between the two sides, which is not an unofficial agreement, but still very high-level, ex-high-level and high-level officials were part of it, we examined all the other options, and we decided that although it's not a perfect option, it is the only viable option. And the reason for it is because all the other options will create a lot of difficulties to the two countries. First of all, there is this the Palestinians are entitled to a state exactly like the state of Israel. It's not as if, and this is on one hand, and then the state of Israel was established to be a homeland for the Jewish people after all the difficult history of the Jewish people. So the Jewish people need a homeland, the Palestinian people need a state and a homeland, the Palestinian people need a state. So the only thing is to divide the piece of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea and to establish two states. Unfortunately, there is the question of, is it possible? And sometimes this question is more important for some people than the question of, is it the best solution? And in my view, it is the best solution, although sometimes, like today, maybe less today than a week ago, it is the best solutions that we can work out and work with.
Thank you for that. Yuval, would you like to respond?
First of all, I agree, but I will elaborate a bit about something that Israela said. I think that as time goes, it becomes harder and harder to achieve a two-state solution. I think that more and more people can explain to us how it is difficult, why it is impossible, why the circumstances don't allow it. A lot of scholars like to explain that. A lot of Israelis and a lot of Palestinians can give us proof of how problematic it is. But I think that when we think about resolving a conflict, any conflict, not just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but that includes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have to think, what are the options in front of us? And I think that what the Geneva Initiative is about, it was like that when it was conducted some 17, 18 years ago, and it still is, that is currently the situation. It's, as Israel said, it might not be perfect. It is very problematic, but you have to think, what are the other options you have? Now, we don't want to reach an agreement that is not valuable, that would not last for a long time. And any other option that is proposed from time to time, a one-state solution, a confederation, a federation, all these options, when you look at the facts on the ground, as much as it is difficult, and as Israel said, it becomes more and more difficult. We have more settlements, we have more violence, it is becoming harder. It was easier to do it 15 years ago. But it still remains the only solution that it seems that both sides can accept and that both sides could live happily after, and that will not create an ongoing conflict after we sign an agreement, which is something that we have to take into account when we sign an agreement. It's not only the technicality of signing an agreement, it is also, are we stopping, stopping the mutual demands? Are we stopping the conflict? And I think that it remains the only viable solution.
Thank you for that, Yuval. Now, this is the question for you. Would you like to talk about the reality of living under occupation, and what does peace in the region look like to you?
Thank you, Diana. Before getting into that, I want to first thank Yuval and Israela, and I also agree with them on the two-state. I have to say that. Today, the Palestinian leadership knows that, yes, the two-state solution is possible, but what we need is the will. It is important because it is in the best interests for both Palestinians and Israelis. As Yuval have said, we also have examined and we studied more than one scenario on what the solution would be, one state or otherwise. Two-state is also the basis of the Oslo Interim Agreement. When the Declaration of Principle was signed, the Palestinian leadership, through the PLO, recognized the state of Israel. And in return, Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. Now, it was the basis of a solution because we felt as Palestinians that for peace to be in the region, there has to be a solution, and it would be through the two-state solution. Unfortunately, the interim agreement was never fulfilled, and Because of that, we are still, as Palestinians, living under occupation. So today we have 5 million Palestinians, 2 million living in Gaza, and 3 million living in the West Bank. Unfortunately, the West Bank and Gaza are geographically separated, but it still is the place where Palestinians hope to have their state. I'm speaking of the official position, of course. Now, the West Bank, Gaza today is fully locked, and the West Bank, unfortunately, we have a state whereby Palestinians, 3 million Palestinians, are living on only 40% of the land. But this 40% is not one piece of land that is geographically connected. It's like small pieces of land here and there. The villages and towns are separated from each other. Palestinians are in these smaller areas, and the rest of the area, it's 60% of the West Bank. That's where the settlements are, the road networks are, the settlement infrastructure is. For us Palestinians to live under, I'm speaking about geographical conditions only. For us to move from one place to another, we have restrictions of movement. We're not allowed to build outside these small areas, outside the villages and towns. We are not allowed to use our agricultural land outside the villages. And the villages today are mostly urban areas, but our lands is on the outskirts. And that's where our food basket is. That's where we need to cultivate land. So we have agriculture, we have agro-industries, and we are not allowed to do that because of the occupation. The settlements are all around us in the West Bank. And as Yuval said, I mean, the situation is not as easy as it was 25 years before when the interim agreement was starting. Today, we have a very tense situation. We as Palestinians, we have around us the annexation wall that separates us from Jerusalem. We cannot access. For people to move around, we have to have permits. For me to go visit my parents in Jerusalem, I have to cross checkpoints. For me to travel outside, I need to have permission from Israel. Living under occupation is not as easy as people think, but still, we believe that we deserve to find a solution that will put an end to the occupation, but it still has to be a fair solution. We need to live in freedom and in dignity, and we need to have a better future for our children.
On that note of better future for children, can I then ask you about the Abraham Accords to the panelists? The Abraham Accords is the peace agreement signed in August 2020 under the aegis of US to resume diplomatic relations and full normalization of relations between UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. And concurrently, if I'm not mistaken, Israel also agreed to suspend its plans for annexation of Palestinian territories. Yuval, what are your views about this new agreement?
I am for peace wherever it is, and so I'm happy with this. I don't think we know all the details of how it came to be. Regardless of that, I mean, I think the end result, Israel having 3 more agreements with 3 more Arab countries is very important, and I think that it is important. Both because it could change the atmosphere in the region. It is also important because the way I see conflicts, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other conflicts as well, it is not only about territory, it is not only about water and infrastructures and things like that, it is also about psychology. It is also about our hearts and minds and how we perceive the other. And I think that when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, at least from the Israeli point of view, it is seen as part of the bigger Israeli-Arab conflict. And Israelis have a lot of stereotypes about Palestinians, about Arabs, about Muslims. I think it is true for all the Western world today. I think this agreement could change something in the atmosphere, something in the stereotypes, something in the attitudes of Israelis towards the others. Israel has a history of not all, the whole, if you look at the Jewish history and about the Israeli history, part of our narrative, our story, is the fear from the others. We were always attacked. We always had to defend ourselves from biblical times to the Holocaust. And this is also how Israel perceives itself today. Showing that you can have friendship with the others, that you can have mutual relations, I think is very important. There are those in Israel who believe that part of this agreement might be problematic, because for Israel that means we can have peace agreement with Arab countries, and that will stop us from reaching an agreement with the Palestinians. Because you see, in the past it was like a condition. You have to reach an agreement with the Palestinians, and that is the first step in order to have a regional peace. And I understand this fear. I think that I completely understand why for Israelis that could signal that we can reach an agreement with the Arab world without the Palestinians, which I think is problematic. I think it's problematic because we have to have peace with the Palestinians based on the two-state solution. And I think that there is no Israeli leader, including our current prime minister, who knows that we will never have actual good relations with the Arab world without peace agreement with the Palestinians. So I understand that some Israelis are a bit cautious or feel uncomfortable with it, but I think the overall result of, first of all, having peace instead of having a conflict, and I think it could change the attitudes also towards the Palestinians, and that is why I think I think overall it's a very important step.
Thank you for that. Nidal, would you like to respond? You're on mute, Nidal.
Okay. Good evening first, please. Good evening to those who are in Ramallah and in Tel Aviv. And good morning to those who are in the States. Well, you know, on the Abrahamic Accords, I don't know, first of all, why it's being called Abrahamic, but anyway, on the normalization accords between Israel and 2 or 3 Arab countries. My first intake on that, you know, the question, as Yuval said, I am also with peace wherever it is. And the question here, whether really such accords are peace treaties or bilateral treaties. In fact, such agreements are not peace treaties because they're not used to be a conflict between such countries and Israel in the literal sense. Although such countries never had official relations with Israel, but in reality, during the last 2 decades, we all know that there are a type of a progressive and developing relationship between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, and some other Arab countries. And what happened actually in the last couple of months is the result of such developing relationship. And why also it's only a bilateral relationship? Because, you know, if we are talking about a peace treaty and turning 2 nations from a state of conflict into a state of peace, you know, they cannot the second morning start thinking about allowing a serious military stuff to the other country. So even part of the agreement was the talk on the F-35 and such other military stuff. But put all of this aside, and let's look at such agreements from a different perspective. Yes, such agreements broke the Arab consensus and the country's commitment actually to the framework of the Arab position, specifically the position which has been framed in 2001 in the Arab Peace Initiative. Whether this is important or not, I believe this is extremely important. But Whether actually this is the end of the game, no, it's not the end of the game. And we Palestinians and the rest of the world, frankly, we should not stop too long at such an agreement. Such an agreement should not be that important actually to occupy the space of the political debate in the Middle East when it comes to the Arab-Israeli relationship. Otherwise, this will automatically overshadow the real problem, because the real problem remained untouched. And the day after, actually, when Netanyahu flight back from the States and landed in Tel Aviv, I assure you that before landing, when he looked from the window of the plane, he saw that nothing has changed. The Palestinians are still there, and they are the well-established reality in the region. So the main issue, the only way and the only path to peace which should be followed actually is the Palestinian path. And the rest comes always, whether it will come first or it come last, definitely it is not that so important for us Palestinians, and should not be actually for the rest of the world, as far as it does not substantially change the reality of the Middle East.
For that, Nidal. But then, speaking of agreement between Israelis and the Palestinians, Fatina, a report was published by PLO in June 2020, and you wrote about why a negotiated agreement between Israel and Palestine is off the table. Could you elaborate on the same?
Yes, thank you, Diana. That report was produced, I had an article in it. It was a whole publication focusing on annexation. Now, what I meant by that statement, it followed a previous statement saying that if Israel decides to go ahead with annexation, it means that Israel, what it will do, it will have Israeli sovereignty over part of the occupied land. And there are many annexation bills that have been presented at the Knesset, mostly on areas like the Jordan Valley, the Jerusalem area, Greater Jerusalem, and some settlements, or almost all of the area of Area C. But what it says is that, what I meant, if these annexation plans are to be implemented, then Israel will be drawing the border of what Israel see as maybe the borders of the state of Israel. Now, in negotiations, the border is still is a negotiated issue. It's a permanent status issue that was not agreed upon. And our official position as Palestinians is that the border of the state of Palestine that it shares with the state of Israel should be based on the 1967 border. Now, if annexation is implemented, then we are talking of a whole new borders that Israel will have created. That was what I meant by the border will be off the table. But it also follows another part in that report. I don't know if we mentioned, but even the American vision, the Trump vision for peace, the peace to prosperity, it also speaks about areas that should be under Israeli sovereignty, almost 30% of the area of the West Bank. It's the same thing. These areas, if you compare to the Israeli annexation plans, they are almost identical. So the plan was based on the Israeli hope to have annexation maybe, and should that be implemented, then yes, the border will be off the table. And it's one of the very big issues why the Palestinians have rejected to deal with the US vision that, it's not only that, there are like tens of things that are totally unacceptable by Palestinians. But that's for the border at least.
Speaking of US politics, we are having this event during a very, very crucial moment for the US. Nidal, would you elaborate on what does President-elect Joe Biden mean to Palestine and the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic? And if I'm not mistaken, there's also a comment from one of our audience members on the same, from Mr. Luxembourg. Yeah.
First of all, let me say that with a new reality in Washington. I hope it's now a new reality, because I'm not sure. Nobody can be sure with what is prevailing so far. I believe this has been reflected positively actually on the rest of the world. But I should be even much more clear that when it comes to the Palestinians, there is a sort of excitement. And the excitement among the Palestinians is resulted from 4 years of suffering and humiliation by the Trump administration, and even ignorance. You know, we are the real player when it comes to the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the whole perspective of the Middle East peace process, and he completely ignored us. So definitely, if Biden will be in office in a couple of months, and I hope, and he will, definitely, we expect a lot of steps. But also, to be frank, we Palestinians, we should not make it difficult for him and complicated for him. When it comes to the caused damage and fixing the damage of the previous administration, you know, there are certain decisions, there are certain measures which cannot be fixed, unfortunately, cannot be fixed, specifically when it comes to the move of the embassy to the recognition of Jerusalem. But definitely, we expect from Biden a certain position and certain policy on two main issues. The Palestinian-American bilateral relations. This is extremely important for us, and I believe it is doable. It is doable. And the second issue, actually, a new American approach when it comes to the context of the Middle East peace process. A return back once again to the vision of the two-state solution, and putting aside actually the paradigm which has been created during the last 4 years, that what will come out of our effort, I mean, I refer to the previous administration, it will be the solution. And this is why it didn't work actually with the Palestinians, and will not work with the Palestinians. And the Palestinians actually refused to cooperate or even to surrender for 4 years, despite the political and the financial boycott in this regard. Definitely, we Palestinians should be willing to accept the United States as a mediator or the main mediator within the context of the Middle East peace process. And frankly, during the last 4 years, we Palestinians, we said no, we will not accept. And in this regard, I believe we were right. And now it's the time to give Biden the chance to reactivate the work on the two-state solution and the realization of the two-state solution. And this should be automatically linked to a certain decisions and the plans when it comes to the bilateral relation. When I mentioned the bilateral relation, Biden and his administration should recognize us Palestinians and should recognize at least the minimum of our rights. Biden administration should return back and restore the previous contacts and relations which are also created within the context of the Middle East peace process, specifically the political and the financial support, and the political support specifically when it comes to reopening or re-allowing the Palestinians to have their diplomatic representation in Washington, which has been stopped by Trump's administration. So this is definitely doable. This is, to some extent, is also satisfying to the Palestinians and can create a sort of a common platform for the Americans, the Palestinians, and some other regional players for a new start.
Thank you for that, Nidal. And I'm not going to delve more on this because we also have a lot of questions. So I'm going to take this up in the Q&A bit. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. Role of women in peace processes. Now, the UN passed a resolution about 20 years ago calling for more women to be engaged in peace processes and peace negotiations. And yet, from what I understand, there's been barely any shift in the last 2 decades. And my question is actually beginning with Israela. You have broken the glass ceiling several times. First woman to be appointed deputy to IDF spokesperson, first woman to be appointed a faculty member at IDF National Defense College, the highest academic facility for all security entities, and as Brigadier General, you were credited for major reforms. What are your thoughts on the role of women in peace processes?
Sorry, Diana, but I'm not so obedient, although I'm a general. So I need to say a few words about your 2 previous questions, and just to add something, because this is going to be something optimistic. This is, by the way, the role of women, to be optimistic. So what I would like to say here is we have a rare opportunity now. First of all, the agreement, the Abraham agreement between us and some regional countries, the UAE and others, and the election, Biden being elected in the United States. Those 2 facts create a real opportunity to make things better in our region. Because till now, the regional players were not so active in trying to bring both sides together and to play a effective and a real role by doing it, because they just sat back and waited for us to do the job. I think that the involvement of countries like Saudi Arabia, together with the United States, to try and to open again the negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians under different framework will be very positive to our region. This was me speaking as a woman, by the way. And now the role of women. I think that in every negotiations between countries, the members, the negotiators, there should be a diversity, because you really need, for a better product, a diversity and different voices to be heard. And women, as you heard before, are experience different experiences through wartime, and they have a different point of view. For example, now in the coronavirus, you didn't mention it, but Fatina had mentioned before that we are sitting in our houses trying to take care of our children and family members, and women have a very different role sometimes than men. So their voices should be heard in every decision-making table. If it comes to making peace, if it comes sometimes to decide upon war, and if it comes fighting the COVID-19. So if it's only male sitting there, thinking like male, Yuval and Nidal and all the other male people in the audience, they will come to a different result than if women would be involved. And it really, in 2020, we realized that some prime ministers, and I don't want to mention New Zealand and Germany, but I will, did a very good job, even I dare say, better than other prime minister in other parts of the world, fighting the corona and giving a good answer to their citizens. So I think it's absolutely the right time for women to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Israela. No, it is certainly, it was always the right time, I would say, even 20 years ago, 40 years ago, we should have been a part of the solution. We're not. In fact, I want to put this question to Nidal and Yuval. Nidal, you've been a part of several interstate negotiations. I have witnessed that, being part of one of the stakeholder negotiations, and I remember there was not a single woman there, both from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. What is keeping them, or what is keeping decision makers, it's like just letting men in and not women?
Well, thank you. First of all, I fully agree with Israela. Definitely, the result of an effort which is being put by women is always completely different than the result of an effort which is being put by men. Unfortunately, women in Palestine are underrepresented. I cannot claim that they are, playing the role which they should or expected to play, specifically when it comes to the senior and high-level positions, and when it comes to the context of the political process or the decision-making process. Definitely, this is attributed to so many reasons on the Palestinian side, and not necessarily the reasons on the Palestinian side do exist on the Israeli side. On the Palestinian side, unfortunately, we used to have a sort of traditional restrictions and regulations which limit the women contribution to some extent. But frankly, we managed in the last couple of decades to liberate ourselves from such restrictions. And probably recently, we used to have and we used to see more and more men who are standing for the empowerment of women. And I am always actually for a woman to occupy a senior position. I would love actually to see a prime minister woman in Palestine and a president woman in Palestine too. We used to have so many ministers as women. The Palestinian law in this regard also recorded a sort of a progress when it comes to the women representation, and now it is becoming a legal stipulation that no legislative council can be elected without having 1/3 as women. Even no city council can be elected without having 1/3. But frankly, when it comes to the two political groups in Palestine, mainly Hamas and Fatah, and when it comes to their institutions, the party institutions, and the party institutions, when I speak about Fatah, the institutions of the party, this means that those who reach high positions in the party may move to the government and to the executive branch. Unfortunately, women in the party institutions are very underrepresented. This is a serious problem. This is a serious problem. A party like Fatah, which is looked at to some extent as a moderate party, should consider a policy of empowering women. This is also applies to the negotiating teams, and frankly speaking, while we have a number of smart, excellent, and expert women in the technical teams, in the Palestinian technical teams, unfortunately, I do not remember a woman who is leading a team when it comes to negotiation. So the problem is there. The patriarchal spread and the trends among the society is preventing any opportunity or window of opportunity for women, but definitely it's also their own responsibility to keep the fight and to keep the struggle until getting an equal rights, 100% equal rights. We want to see the women representation in pro rata to their size in the society.
Thank you, Nidal. Fatina, could you elaborate on your role as an expert with the PLO's Negotiation Affairs Department? And of course, your thoughts on the subject.
My thoughts, yes. Well, I definitely, it happens today that we all agree. I mean, it's not as exciting for the listeners, but yes, definitely women needs to be empowered. In Palestine, there's like the potential for, the women are really well educated and they are really keen at what they are doing and good at what they are doing. And they make, if put in senior positions, I'm sure they will succeed. But yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done internally in Palestine to empower the women more to reach senior positions. I believe that it needs to be, I mean, women needs to work side by side with men because both look at things from different perspectives. We women always say that we try to think of everyone when we are taking decisions. We want to make sure that our decision is fair to all that are at stake. So we look from a broader angle. We see women, we see men not thinking like that, and I'm sure they disagree with me. But like in the family, we want to make sure our husbands are happy, our kids are happy, our parents are happy, and we should train ourselves to also think that we should be happy. And that is as mothers and wives and daughters. And this should be applicable on a country level, not only on a family level. At work, I am part of the technical team. And as Nidal said, yes, on the technical level, we have lots and lots of female advisors. The team I'm working with, we have female advisors, legal advisors, we have communication advisors, we have policy advisors. Our office is well balanced with regard to gender. More than half of the staff are women. Our manager is a woman. But when it comes to the negotiators, that's where we disappear. We support, we give advice, but we are not visible beyond that point. It's unfortunate, but I believe that the coming days will show better days for women, I hope. No comment beyond that.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, shall we talk about reconstruction and reconciliation efforts in the region, and specifically transitional justice? Now, and reconstruction processes is often thought of as a post-conflict measure, when permanent peace is basically, when it ensues. Israela, what does reconstruction and reconciliation mean when there's a protracted conflict? What has been the experience in the Israeli-Palestinian context? And what barriers do you see, psychological and or otherwise, towards dealing with the past?
Both sides we have experienced in our long history many events that shaped our narratives and had created a great deal of hostility and other negative feelings between each other. The attempt of negotiators, most of them men, by the way, to try and to ignore the fact that people have emotions and you cannot look to the future unless you understand your past, not only is impossible. And you have to understand not only your past, you have to understand the other side parts. And I'm not saying that we need to create a mutual narrative. It's impossible. You cannot do it. And we realized it in our first meeting in one of our projects related to dealing with the past. We cannot do it. However, what we can do is to try and to learn each other narrative, to understand, maybe not to agree, but to understand their point of view and to try to see what are the steps that we need to take in order to make it possible to live together after a peace agreement is achieved. And this is, by the way, one of the most difficult personally, it was one of the most difficult projects I have attended with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Nidal could correct me, but I think he feels the same way. It was very complicated because people were emotional, and it is very tough to talk about emotion. It's much more easy to talk about kilometers on the border and square miles. Because it's a technical issue. However, we realized after a very long time that we dealt with this project, that it is possible to get to an agreement. An agreement meaning that we know what we want to do after a peace is achieved by the two parties, how we want to deal with the issues of the conflict, how we and how we want to educate the governments and also the people how to address those issues. And we were using a model called Dealing with the Past. We had an excellent mediator named Moderator, but there are many models, and I think this model worked for us. However, I must say that we changed a little bit the model because it's never the same conflict in every place. And I'm happy to say that we have some kind of suggestions. I think they are useful to the next Israeli and Palestinian government that will create peace between the two states.
Thank you so much, Israela. Yuval, any thoughts on the same?
Fatina said that we don't fight enough, so the audience might be bored, so I'll try to fight Israela. No, I'm kidding.
I'm waiting for it.
No, I want to, first of all, I agree with her, but I want to provide another perspective of it. I don't think that reconciliation, that we should look at it as reconciliation happens after an agreement is signed. We can talk about reconciliation processes from now, starting now. A lot of things that have to do with reconciliation, like talking about the past, like dealing with the past, like changing in the education system, like meeting each other. A lot of things, we shouldn't look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as something that has to go linearly, meaning the negotiators will negotiate, they will reach an agreement, and then we'll start reconciliation. Especially not, you know, when social media, new media is here, and the citizens, the people, not only track 2, but also track 3 and grassroots initiatives. People have a lot of power to change reality, and reconciliation processes can start before an agreement is signed. We can, and it could lead to an agreement. Now, of course, if we want to reach a full recognition of one another and a full reconciliation process, that might happen or could happen only after an agreement is signed, because it is very hard to educate kids about reconciliation when the sides are shooting each other. You can study reconciliation in school, but when you walk out of school, if there's shooting, what you were just taught in school does not really help you in any way. Nevertheless, I think this is part of what the Geneva Initiative is doing, and I think that is an important part of what it is doing, is not waiting. I mean, trying to influence the negotiators, trying to influence the decision makers, but also changing things on the ground, the perception today. And I think it is important, again, not to wait, and I think things are being done. Unfortunately, the most significant thing that happens in both Israeli society and Palestinian society for, I think it's a decade, if not more than that, is despair. People just don't trust one another and don't believe that it is possible anymore. And this is something that should be addressed more and more, because, and that goes back to what Israela said, it's not only about square miles and what you do with the refugees, super important issues. I'm not saying it's not, but it is the minds, the belief that you can actually achieve it, they believe that you have a partner on the other side, you have someone to talk to, that an agreement is worth something. And I think all of this are part of a reconciliation process that can, should, and are being done on a daily basis and not waiting for an agreement to be signed.
Thank you for that. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go to my last question. Oh, yes, Fatina, you want to add, please? Please.
Yes, if I may add. Speaking of reconciliation, the one factor that is very important is the timing. Right now, for me as a Palestinian, what I see is that Palestinians' homes are being demolished. Sorry, Yuval and Israela, but that's what we're living under. Our homes are being demolished. We are not allowed to use our resources. We have to cross checkpoints. Our children, I have teenagers at home, and I have 21-year-old daughter and 20-year-old son. And it is scary for me when they tell me that they want to go out in the evening at night just to hang out with their friends. This generation, it's very difficult. Living under these conditions, living under occupation, under the threat of something bad will happen at any moment. It's very difficult to discuss reconciliation. Israel needs to understand that the policies that are being imposed on Palestinians are making the gap between Palestinian people and Israeli people wider with each passing day. Talking about reconciliation is nice. Talking about dealing with the past and coexisting is very nice. Of course, we all want to live in peace. We are very tired of living under occupation. But this needs to go hand in hand with change of policies of the state of Israel, how it deals with the Palestinians.
Thank you for that intervention, Fatina. I think that's a good segue for my next question, actually, on COVID. Now, that has an impact globally, but it does impact different people differently. So I want to ask, all four of you, and beginning with perhaps Fatina, maybe you can go first. Just the impact, the socioeconomic impact, the health implications in the Palestinian regions, and with everything that's essentially happening.
On the COVID-19 issue, and the COVID-19 is a global issue, and we Palestinians are not very different than any other country, except that we have even more restrictions. Because of COVID, our already very weak economy has become weaker. We have a very poor health system, and it is very scary for all of us because, as you know, the COVID system, as you have seen in Europe and America, if the health system is not a good one and a solid one, it can collapse very easily. And I'm not an expert on the issue, but as a mother and as a Palestinian and living under times of lockdown, and there is no work, and the economy is really bad, and people don't have money. The frustration is really high. The schools are closed. People can't travel outside. Those who have been abroad in universities are already home and taking online lessons. So the frustration is building. It's not easy, and it can be easier if the occupation ends. I will leave that to Foqaha, to Nidal, please, to continue, because I'm not an expert on that.
Nidal, just quickly though, because we were actually running out of time, and I genuinely want to take some of the audience questions. I have a very specific question for you. The implications of Palestinian Authority in halting coordination with Israel, and putting that in context with the COVID situation. Briefly, please, 30 seconds.
Yeah. COVID-19 is adding to the already existing hardships the Palestinians are suffering from. We have the financial problem and the financial crisis, and it has been escalated since the BA decided not to receive the money from Israel. And we have a decision by the United States to stop financing the Palestinians. And actually there is a retreat back in the Arab support to the Palestinians. So taking all together, this leads to a serious and real socio-economic crisis beside the political crisis which is existing actually here.
Okay. Yuval, Israela, one of you, anybody wants to talk about this as well?
I will just say, first of all, I want to make clear that, continuing what Fatina said, I don't think this conflict is symmetric. I do understand the differences between Israelis and Palestinians. I know that what the Palestinians are experiencing is very different from what Israelis are experiencing, and I don't think that reconciliation can happen without changing the reality on the ground. But as I said before, the main thing that I think is problematic today, and I completely understand the differences between the sides, is that both sides are so despair, are in a position that they don't even try to do anything from both sides, and that is a tragedy of this conflict today. Even when we see polls saying, and the Geneva Initiative does these polls, that the majority in the two sides still want a solution, there's a bigger majority that doesn't even want to start negotiating because of disbelief in the other side, and that is something that has to be changed. So I want to make that clear. Down to what you asked, often we say in conflict resolution that an outside enemy can unite the people together. So we could dream of Israelis and Palestinians uniting against COVID-19. Not only that did not happen, Israeli society from within is more divided because of COVID-19 and not the other way around. So this theory was proven incorrect in this incident.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Yuval. I'm now going to go to the audience questions because we have about 3 minutes. I think in part I think Yuval touched upon this, but this is a question from Wayne Jotna. To what extent does Orthodox minority in Israel represent an obstacle to peace because of their influence in Israel's internal politics? Yuval or Israela?
Israela, do you want to answer that or me?
The Orthodox community in Israel is almost always connecting with the right wing. They are great supporters of the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and they are, since the issue of peace is not their main interest joining any government, they will support a government that will surrender to their demands regarding their way of life. And since right now we are talking about a right-wing government which surrendered to the demands, all their demands, it is really problematic. However, in the past, they attended some not right-wing governments, and they followed the agenda of the sometimes peace agenda of the government. However, right now Israel has a very serious problem with them regarding governance. They are doing almost as they really behave in a very sometimes irresponsible way regarding the corona rules and how to behave in public, and the Israeli government is almost I don't know how to say, but they have difficulties how to control them. So we are dealing with a population that is problematic to our problems with the coronavirus, and also for right now, even the right-wing government to trying to renew the peace process.
Thank you for that. There's a question from, and apologies, I'm not sure if I can pronounce her name properly. It's Iona Rand. And this is for all of you. If each of you could offer a single policy initiative for the Biden administration, what would it be? Shall we start with Nidal?
It's for me?
Yeah, it's for all of you, so we'll start with you.
I know, I will not speak about a specific initiative, actually, but it is extremely important for Biden administration to revive the efforts for promoting the two-state solution once again, because a two-state solution is the only solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And I will try actually and refer to a certain another question, because in such case, we, the group of people who are here, as well as the vast majority of Palestinians and Israelis, we do not believe that there is any other viable alternative to the two-state solution. Mr. Biden made a clear reference to the two-state solution during his campaign. What we want him is to be serious and actually to turn such a promise during the campaign into a program for his administration.
Yuval, would you like to respond to that?
I generally agree with what Nidal said. I do think that it's, at the end of the day, it's up for to the sides. I mean, the U.S. has a lot of influence, and when President Trump, you know, backed up with the Israeli attitude, and which was not for two-state solution, it was harder to blame the Palestinians for anything. So I think the best thing that Biden could do is really try to influence the sides to negotiate. But at the end of the day, I always think about it, it's our responsibility. It's the Palestinians' responsibility. It's the Israelis' responsibility. We need the backup of the world to do that. The Arab world, the Western world, and the United States has a lot of influence in that, and Biden could help in that. But I think it is important for us, I'm talking as an Israeli, who blames the Israeli government and the Palestinian government for not negotiating. I have complaints not to Biden. I mean, I hope he can give us help with that, but I have complaints to my government for not negotiating. I hope Biden could help in that. I also want to refer, I think, to the same question that Nidal mentioned before, because I saw a question of what's our plan B. I don't think we even tried plan A. We have to start doing plan A of a two-state solution, and then we'll figure out maybe we should look at plan B, but let's do something with plan A before going to plan B.
Can I add a little bit?
Please.
Well, we started plan A, Yuval. We started it in 1993 when we signed the Declaration of Principle. Unfortunately, it's not that people don't want to, both sides don't want to negotiate. The problem is that the two sides, I mean, it's Israel. I mean, there has been lots of violations from the Israeli side to the signed agreements. I cannot but say that. What we need from... But if you look at the list of the Israeli violations of the signed agreement, I know we have our problems. I'm not closing my eye. I know that we have domestic issues here in Palestine that we need to fix. I need that, but we have stepped forward, a huge step to enter a peace agreement. But we haven't been, I mean, we have faced lots of obstacles, and the most of them was the violations of the signed agreements. What we need from the US administration is what we hope is that we don't want the US to close its eye on these violations. We need to have an unbiased broker will give both sides the same amount of support. We need a recognition of the state of Palestine. We will be a state of Palestine negotiating with the state of Israel. That would be a good start.
If you may allow me, I need to say something. Can I do?
Yes, please. Okay.
I fully disagree with Yuval. When it comes, it's up to us. It's up to us in the normal circumstances, but not when there is an extreme right-wing government in Israel which does not want to deal with the Palestinians or to consider them appropriately. In such a case, definitely we need a mediator who has the strong leverage on Israel. Why we suffered during the last 4 years? Because we, for the first time probably, we find an administration in Washington which endorse every single policy and the plan which the Israeli government wants, and even adopt it. You know, the Trump peace plan, I assure you that we who are joining this panel, we know much more what is in this plan than Trump himself, because he got it completely backed by the Israeli experts, and he just said this is a Trump plan for peace. This is why we need a more realistic and more fair and American administration in order to deal and to intervene in this conflict, specifically to practice pressure on Israel. Otherwise, if it will be left to Israel, Israel will continue looking and dealing with us as an occupied nation. And this is what we don't accept and don't want to continue with this approach.
May I add one word?
Yes, please.
I think President-elect Biden has a lot on his plate. And I believe that the Israelis and the Palestinians, we should help him to help us. And we should do and say, our leaders should do and say stuff that will help him to be involved in our conflict and help us to solve it.
Thank you so much. And with that, folks, it's definitely time. This was an amazing discussion. Thank you so much to all our speakers, and thank you so much for every one of you who attended this, and for all the questions that you've put. It was certainly what I would call an enlightening and a very, very interesting round of discussion. So thank you so much for that. And I'd also like to thank our strategic partners, HLSWA-India and Daksha Fellowship, and a special thanks to Sanveer Singh. Thank you very much, and have a good day or good evening or good night from whichever part of the world you are in. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck.